Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the afternoon edition of the preliminary round 2 in the public sector debate competition. I'm Aniki Clark, Communication Lead in the Transformation Implementation Unit, and we're so glad to have you join us, be it here in the room or virtually on our YouTube channel. It's been a great morning, and I'm sure it will be an equally great afternoon, if not better. Right, teams? Yes? I want to hear the resounding yes. Yes. Great. I love that. I love that. This afternoon, we have in proposition Maggotty High School, and in opposition, the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency. They will be debating the moot, be it resolved that Jamaica should peg annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth. This is a safe space. The teams will advance arguments in favor or against the moots, not their personal views. So we don't want the unions and their colleagues to say, how could you, or, that sort of a thing. It's a safe space to debate. But let's get to meet them, starting with team proposition. Please introduce yourself. Lovely. Thank you, Team Maggotty. Let's now hear from Team Passport, Immigration Citizenship Agency.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jervey Ennis, first speaker for the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordana Lindsay McNee, second speaker for Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angelicia Stewart, and I'll be the third speaker for Team PICA.
Thank you, Team PICA. Let's hear it for the teams. And our judges for the afternoon come to you from the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, JADE, as always. And so I will now invite the judges to introduce themselves, starting with the chair adjudicator.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ravon Thomas Matthews, and I'll be the chair judge for this round.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lacardiga Nelson, serving as a wing adjudicator. All the best to both teams.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantal Hughes, and I'll be a wing adjudicator for this match.
Thank you very much, judges. And at this point, I will hand over to Ravon, who will marshal the match. All that's left for me to do is to wish the teams the best of luck in this very interesting and stimulating conversation. I'll call it that. Over to you, Ravon.
Thank you very much, Aniki. So teams, you are all familiar with the JADE parliamentary debate format by now, but nevertheless, I'll go over it for a viewing audience and just to concretize that knowledge. So first speaker from each team, you'll present for 7 minutes. Second speaker, you will have 6 minutes to present your case. And then the third and final speakers from each team, you'll have 5 minutes to present your substantive. It's important to note that for the first and last minute of each speech, we call it protected time, in which we don't allow any points of information. Outside of protected time, we not only allow points of information, but for the sake of engagement, we actually welcome them. Of course, you'll hear your time signals via the ding of a bell. One ding means that you've either exited or entered your protected time. 2 bells, you'll hear ding ding. That means that you've used up all of your allocated speaking time. However, you may be in the middle of a thought or wrapping up a really interesting argument, and so we give you 15 seconds to do that, after which you will hear the bell ding continuously, which means that the judges are no longer listening and you should yield the floor. Of course, between the first and second speeches and the second and third speeches, we'll have 2 periods of cross-examination. But I'll tell you a little bit more about the cross when we get to that part of the debate. Once more, the moot before us reads, be it resolved that Jamaica should peg annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth. It is my honor to open this debate, and to do so, we invite the first speaker from the team in proposition, Maggotty High School. Please make welcome Ms. Pearline Livingston.
Madam Speaker, honorable judges and worthy opponents, good afternoon. Today I stand before you in support of the moot. Be it resolved that Jamaica should peg annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth. Before I stomp on this notion that Jamaica's annual wage increase should outweigh the country's nominal GDP growth, let me define some key terms. Peg. Peg means to fix or match something to a particular value or standard. Annual wage increases. Annual wage increase refers to the rise in salaries or wages workers receive each year. Nominal GDP growth. Nominal GDP growth is the increase in total value of goods and services produced in the economy without adjusting for inflation. My team firmly supports the moot as the peg of annual wage increases to Jamaica's nominal GDP growth, 1, ties wages to productivity, 2, provides a more objective approach to wage determination, and last but not least, provides fiscal responsibility and debt sustainability. Come with me while I lay the foundation of a solid house that team proposition will build throughout this debate. First, let's line and dig this strong economic foundation. The peg of annual wage increases to Jamaica's nominal GDP growth ties remuneration directly to productivity. GDP is known to be one of the most transparent indicators of how well the economy of a country is doing and how productive it is. When businesses in the goods and services industry increase their productivity, the economic activity grows and expands, which then successfully grows the GDP. Linking salary increases to GDP growth ensures that wages are in alignment with what the country actually produces, which creates balance to the country's economy. This linkage is considered vital because increases in salaries should reflect the actual state of the economy. Oftentimes, my opponents, pay raises are mainly influenced by industrial pressure, political factors, or strength of union negotiations. This creates imbalance. Government borrowing money, IMF rings a bell. Boss laying off workers, reduced investments, which can lead to economic concerns as it relates to the strong economic support. By tying wages to GDP growth, Jamaica should adopt a system based on realistic national productivity rather than outside pressure, Madam Speaker. This approach also motivates work satisfaction, which results in more productivity from workers and businesses. Imagine a Jamaica, my opponents, where citizens do not feel the need to migrate for better job opportunities. If people comprehend that better economic performance can result in higher wages, then they will be more encouraged to work efficiently, innovate, and positively impact the economy. Just imagine Jamaica economy thriving. Moreover, Jamaica has already demonstrated the importance of careful economic management. Jamaica lowered its public debt to GDP ratio from about 140% in 2012 to roughly 62% in 2024 through smart fiscal policies and discipline. This shows that policies related to a measurable economic performance can boost national development. My second argument is that...
Information.
Accepted?
How does your policy avoid worsening brain drain from Jamaica's public sector, especially? nurses, doctors, and teachers?
Repeat.
How does your policy avoid worsening brain drain in Jamaica's public sector, especially among nurses, doctors, and teachers?
Because once public sector workers feel secure in what is presented to them, they will stay. My second argument is that linking wages to nominal GDP growth creates a clearer and fairer way to decide on salary raises. Nominal GDP is based on solid data, not assumptions, my opponents. The Statistical Institute of Jamaica carefully calculated GDP figures using information gathered from businesses, households, government activity, and financial sector. Since GDP reflects data collected across the economy, it offers a consistent and clear measure of the nation's economic performance. Other ways to set wages are often more subjective. Decisions can be swayed by political pressure, emotional pleas, protests, and short-term public unhappiness. On the other hand, a GDP-based approach relies on measurable economic facts instead of feelings or outside influences. This brings predictability for workers, businesses, and the government alike. Employers can better budget for labor costs, government can handle public spending more wisely, workers can easily see how their salary increases are figured out. Madam Speaker, the Jamaican economy itself shows clear economic growth. Jamaica's economy grew by 1.4% in the first quarter of 2024, marking the country's 12th straight quarter of economic growth. This shows that we can consistently measure GDP growth and reasonably use it as a reliable guide for increasing wages. Other measures like GDP rely on statistical estimates that have mistakes or missing information. No economic measure is completely flawless. Nominal GDP still represents the actual money flowing in the economy, the same economy that pays salary. So it remains a useful and relevant way to decide on wage increases. Madam Speaker, as I close the foundation of this argument, Jamaica simply cannot spend more than what we produce. For these reasons, the proposition firmly supports the move.
And thank you very much. That was the first speaker from T. Maggotty High School. At this point in time, we invite the first speaker from the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency to take the stage. Mr. Ennis, please make him welcome.
Nominal GDP growth does not reflect private sector wage trends or cost of living directly. Public sector workers might see stagnant wages even when private sector's wages are rising faster, leading to labor disputes, strikes, or talent drain. Good day, panel and audience. The motion before us reads, be it resolved that Jamaica should peg annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth. At first glance, this may sound responsible. It may further sound economically prudent and disciplined. But panel, when we strip away the fancy verbiage, what the proposition is truly asking Jamaica to do is this: to tell our nurses, teachers, police officers, and civil servants that their value depends not on their sacrifice, not on their workload, not on inflation, not on the cost of living, but on a single economic number they do not control. And that is fundamentally unjust and not sustainable. Panel, the point at which we prove that proposition cannot get better productivity or fiscal returns through the policy is the exact point they lose this debate. Fishermen never say fish stink, but it is our duty to show the proposition that something not smell right about this policy. To do so, there are three major issues I will establish. First, public sector workers are not the primary drivers of GDP and therefore should not be punished for weak growth they cannot control. Second, Pegging wages to GDP will worsen migration, weaken public services, and ultimately harm economic growth itself. Third, this policy destroys fair wage negotiation and replaces human realities with a cold mechanical ceiling. Pegging wage increases to GDP blocks fair wage negotiation. In status quo, wage negotiations happen based on real need. Trade unions like the Jamaica Civil Servants and the Jamaica Teachers Association argue for increases based on gross overwork public sector employees face. JTA Presidents Mark Malava and Lasanja Harrison have pointed to mass emigration, STEM teacher shortages, critical undersourcing, and unsustainable teacher-to-student ratios. How can the proposition call this an unfair metric for assessing wages? The proposition may claim these factors remain permissible within GDP peg negotiations, but they cannot have their cake and eat it too. If GDP growth is reliably slow, the wage increases will be reliably small. Average GDP growth over the last 10 years has been 0.8%. We know definitely that the government will not approve considerable wage increases under this framework. This is not fiscal balancing. It is certain doom. Wages will stagnate. Our people will suffer. Essential factors like understaffing, overwork, seniority, and the dignified cost of living will become secondary to one blunt number, GDP growth. Therefore, GDP should not be the benchmark by which wages and salaries are increased, given that a positive increase is not always guaranteed and the nominal GDP increases does not necessarily indicate inflation rate. Not accepted. Previously, workers were rewarded on individual merit. High performers could argue their case. Now, high performers and low performers are judged on exact same external metric. This is contrary to good public sector performance. There is no incentive to excel when good work will not yield just rewards. Young, hard-working public sector employees who have performed well have no grounds to argue for wage increase to start families, build homes, or advance simply because GDP did not grow. Our frontline workers who risk their lives against crime and terror, our nurses who brave COVID-19, our teachers who accept uncompetitive wages to educate Jamaica's children, all punished by a system that cannot see their labor because it does not churn out of a direct GDP figure. Is labor only valuable when it produces dollars and cents? Money saved from pegging wages pays in comparison to the cost of stagnation. The proposition acknowledges the need for fair wages, but says they cannot break the budget. Put simply, these wages increases are necessary to keep the public sector operational. Public sector compensation is already deeply uncompetitive against international counterparts. The average annual pay for a high school teacher in Canada is $7,272,844 Jamaican dollars, compared to $2,477,993 Jamaican dollars in Jamaica, well over double. Before benefits, family allowances, or sheer aggressiveness of foreign recruiters not accepted. Panel, Jamaica is losing. The average teacher emigration rate is 45.9%. We see the same bleed across health, security, work, and transportation. If migration is happening, when proposition claims they are undeserved increases, what happens under stagnation? When wages stay flat while inflation and cost of living rise, vital young workers will exist. GDP gets worse. The logic is simple. Public roads, security, education, and health create the framework for a successful economy. A good JUTC bus route, even at a deficit, gets hundreds of workers to their jobs safely. tourism enterprises depend on public roads, locally educated staff, and municipal policing. These services don't generate GDP directly, but the private sector's ability to profit depends entirely on them. Research finds that the total losses from skilled immigration, including lost productivity, externalities on those who stay, and the government investment in the education of migrants can reach up to 20% of GDP in Jamaica, with emigration losses nearly equaling remittances. Those most likely to leave are of childbearing age and among the most educated, with only 9.3% of male and 17.7% of female workers holding degrees. Losing the most qualified workers erodes Jamaica's potential. Panel, when Dudu Coke was arrested, he tried to escape heavily disguised. The proposition is doing the exact same thing today, and we are dressing up wage as suppression, as efficiency, productivity, and discipline.
And that
Picker will not be fooled. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ennis. First speaker from PICA. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the first period of cross-examination. This segment will see the team in opposition pose 3 questions to the team in proposition. Each question will last no more than 10 seconds, and each answer will be limited to 45 seconds. For the team that is asking the question, only one individual may do so at any given point in time. However, for the team answering the question, the entire team can chime in to respond. After the 3 questions from PICA have been asked and answered, we'll invite Team Maggotty to pose their questions. With that said, we open this first period of cross-examination with Team PICA posing their first question.
My first question: why should public servants accept automatic restraint when politicians can still make discretionary spending decisions elsewhere?
Could you please repeat the question?
Certainly. Why should public servants accept automatic restraint when politicians can still make discretionary spending decisions elsewhere?
As we stated, we accept that all systems are flawed. Once you're using GDP, we accept that there is a flaw. But what we are saying is that if you peg it to grow, at least you have something to argue. There is some form of growth. The reality is that whether it is pegged to nominal GDP or not, politicians always have an edge. It is what is in the Caribbean. Internationally, that is our reality. But we're saying give public sector a chance with wage increase, because this growth can also be great. It doesn't have to be minimal.
My next question: given Jamaica's history of IMF-supported fiscal restraint, why should public workers bear additional automatic limits on wage bargaining?
As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why we want to eliminate this wage bargaining, as my first speaker would have said, is that we don't want this negotiation out there. We want something that is constant. So we are pegging it to it because we can look into that and say, all right, if this increases, we get this growth. If we get this positive growth, growth doesn't have to be negative. Growth is the core. If we get this positive growth, we're saying that these persons can benefit. So we're looking out for the public sector.
After a hurricane damages GDP, why should frontline emergency workers receive smaller wage increases despite working more?
Patriotism is one. We will start there. That is our reality. We are Jamaicans, and we are in Jamaica, not for ourselves only, the sustainability for our children. That is what we want to create. So, yes, we are saying that there are cases where you may see that there's a little pinch. We don't support the pinch, we're thinking of the growth. We're thinking of the positivity that can come from this.
All right, thank you very much, Team PICA and Team Maggotty. Your 3 questions.
Do you think the strategies currently being used by the Jamaican government to determine salaries are effective? If so, explain the country's constant need to borrow from the IMF.
Thank you for that question. Yes, we do believe that the strategies currently used in status quo are effective. These strategies include negotiation with the trade unions based on humanitarian factors, factors such as
staff members being overworked, the increase in size of the classroom, the ratio of percentage of children to teacher. So those factors are considered in the negotiation, and these are done in line of the economy, what is happening in the economy. So we do agree with the measures that are being used.
You just said that in light of what's happening in the economy, isn't this nominal GDP what is happening in the economy? Because your first speaker said we should pay them what they deserve, but we believe that. We're teachers, pay us please. But we're saying, what about the GDP? What about the nominal growth? Should it not be aligned?
And that is time for your question, your answer.
We do not believe that it should be pegged. What we're saying, we accept that there is an economical issue. We are not disputing that. What we are opposing is the measures that you want to implement, pegging it to a nominal figure, one single nominal number that public sector have zero control over. No. When these things happen, we have to check the reality of what is happening. And we are not in agreement with that.
If you're not pegging it to nominal GDP growth, what do you suggest we peg it to and why?
We do not suggest that it is pegged. Pegged suggests permanency. We are of the opinion that it should allow flexibility for negotiation. So, in status quo, when the economy is going down in a downturn, there are wage caps, there are wage freezes. These things happen, and the public sector have sacrificed tremendously. There have been years of wage freezes, and the public sector has paid their price. They have sacrificed, and they are willing to do so. We are saying we do not want a permanent pegging to the nominal GDP. We need flexibility.
All right, thank you very much for that first period of cross-examination, both teams. At this point in time, we're going to invite the second speaker from Maggotty High School, that speaker, Taylor Smith. Please make her welcome.
Distinguished adjudicators, fellow opponents, members of the audience, good afternoon. My first speaker has already established that pegging annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth is not only the responsible but also the sustainable approach. My opponent's argument that there are fair negotiations in Jamaica is severely detached from economic realities here, and as such, it is my duty to bring this debate back to the facts. Mr. Speaker, we cannot meaningfully discuss wages without first addressing the elephant in the economy, inflation. Rising prices directly impact the purchasing power of Jamaican workers. Jamaica has been feeling the pressure from increases in cost of essentials such as food, transportation, housing, as let us not even mention electricity. We are seeing this, it's in the news media. Headlines such as 15% increase in bus and taxi fare approved. Taxi operators warn of fare increases as fuel prices rise. Inflation soars to a 10-month high on transport and food prices. Rising costs deepen frustration amongst Jamaicans. We must ask ourselves, if these prices are continuing to rise, does our salary rise with them? Mr. Speaker, this is precisely why nominal GDP is the most realistic framework for protecting workers' purchasing power. Nominal GDP is simply, let me put it simply, real GDP plus inflation. It accounts for the total value of all goods and services in the economy, including the rising prices that we all have to contend with. It already reflects what is happening. The cost of living is high, so when the prices go up, so should our salary. This means that the wage increases are not only impactful when we see it on our pay advice, but the real changes that are happening in the country. When we receive such a salary, we have a real opportunity to contend with inflation. Mr. Speaker, we must also move beyond inflation and consider the political reality of wage settings in Jamaica every single year, and we do it all the time. Between the government and the public sector unions, we see the negotiations taking place. Jamaica Teachers Association, often these negotiations become tense, highly politicized, and it begins or it ends with the teachers wearing black. These negotiations are influenced not only by what the economy can do, but also by the pressure, the public sentiment, and industrial action, as my first speaker would have highlighted. This creates a system where our outcomes do not necessarily reflect what the economy can sustain, can afford, but on who is able to exert the most pressure at that given time. On the other hand, pegging wage increases to nominal GDP growth removes a large portion of that uncertainty. Instead of the annual conflict dressed as negotiation, there is fairness and there is economic discipline.
Point of information.
Not accepted. To build on my first speaker's point about economic imbalance, public sector workers are often grossly underpaid and still being asked to perform an ineffective mandate. The result, the loss of talent, as 80% of Jamaicans with tertiary-level education live abroad. The imbalance between public sector and private sector wages contributes significantly to this migration. Ask yourselves, if public sector wages were pegged to nominal GDP growth, will Jamaica not benefit significantly? Finally, we must return to the core of the moot, growth. If there's no growth in nominal GDP, it means that the economy is not expanding, the country is not producing, national income is not increasing, and our resources would be limited. In such a time as this, it would not be responsible for us to expect huge increases. We cannot give what we don't have because there is simply no room in the economy to support such a thing. When the economy grows, we also grow with it. Wages will increase, and when the country grows and maintains stability during low growth periods. My opponents, this policy does not seek to limit workers. On the contrary, it pegs expectations with reality, building salaries around the actual growth of the Jamaican economy. Thank you.
And thank you very much. At this point in time, we would like to invite the second speaker from Team PICA, Jordina Lindsay Metney.
Panel, stop listening to this debt and affordability argument. Proving something is costly is not enough to prove that it is unnecessary or irresponsible. The proposition has not shown what Jamaica actually loses by allowing fair wage increases, while we have shown what is at stake: quality healthcare, education, transportation, and other essential public services that people depend on to live with dignity. These are not luxuries, these are necessities. Public sector wages are not the major contributor to government overspending and fiscal irresponsibility. We do not believe that it is sufficient evidence to say that the public sector wages are the cause of irresponsible savings or the cause of borrowing just by demonstrating that it takes up a good share of the GDP. Proposition has to prove that the number of inflated and unjustified, that the number is inflated and unjustified, which they have not done. In fact, they agree that wage negotiations are necessary, and they would agree that negotiations based on the factors listed earlier are fair and reasonable. So how can it be said that we are overspending? Panel, we are spending the precise amount to keep the sector viable and protect the Jamaican people and wider economy. Austerity alone cannot solve the issue of high borrowing. Of all the instances Jamaica has engaged IMF for bailout, the most recent has been the most successful, with Jamaica now boosting a 60% debt to GDP ratio. This continues to decline. The result of the adoption of strict fiscal rules in 2014, directing government spending towards more responsible habits, the establishment of the Economy Program Oversight Committee to monitor economic reforms, and greater independence to the Bank of Jamaica as a macroeconomical regulator has helped in this cause. Fiscal responsibility is not achieved simply by limiting spending, but ensuring that public spending and investment produce meaningful results. Jamaica already has mechanisms such as public investment management systems, which evaluate public projects to determine whether their benefits justify their cost. We argue that investment in the public sector have delivered significant returns, and reducing the investment could carry serious consequences. Capping public sector wages is not a cure-all for fiscal discipline. The greater danger lies in politically driven and reactionary spending policies that focus on reducing wage expenditure simply because it represents a large number of the GDP. Throughout this debate, we have demonstrated that public sector wages are necessary and a worthwhile investment directly supporting national development. Instead, we should pay attention and direct our attention to support national development. Instead, we are far less... Instead, attention should be directed towards other areas of government spending that are far less justifiable. Issues such as corruption, mismanagement, and waste, which continue to cost the country substantial sums each year, with reports from the Auditor General of Jamaica regularly highlighting hundreds of millions of dollars lost through poor planning and efficient spending. No, thank you. Panel. Limiting public spending on wage increases may encourage foreign direct investment by signaling fiscal discipline or reducing risk of excessive borrowing. Yes, we contend with that. But at the same time, corporations are not primarily concerned with what the government borrows. It's concerned with the outcome that the government gives. We can even see that the debt to GDP ratio climbed to high of 140 in 2013, and this was in spite of the national crisis. Trade unions argue on good grounds and are based on needs. Predictability really means predictability getting nothing. Predictable growth at near zero means the government has made a strict rule to turn a blind eye and to the needs and necessary increases because growth has not happened, which is not the public sector's fault. Politicization really comes in as when the public sector wages are used as scapegoat for poor and irresponsible spending elsewhere, and cuts or freezes are made. We should allocate our funds based on need. We need to pay the public sector employees, and they will in turn provide services. Engineers will manage the energy system, teachers will teach, bus drivers will transport people, nurses will be able to work with dignity and pride in spite of the hardship. Ladies and gentlemen, public sector workers are the backbone of national development. Wages should be based on fairness, cost of living, and the need to maintain effective workforce, not tied rigidly to economic fluctuations beyond their control. For these reasons, we rest our case.
And thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the second period of cross-examination. The rules remain largely the same. However, this time we'll invite Maggotty High School to pose their questions first.
Your second speaker said we should allocate based on needs. That's the emphasis. So wouldn't it be better to allocate based on numbers, based on statistics, based on actual growth, based on GDP?
These numbers that you are referring to would not be based on needs. They would be a standard, set in stone and unmovable. The needs that we talk about are for the people. We talk about when the times are high, we adjust. When the times are low, nominal GDP are low, we adjust. That way, flexibility is maintained whether the economy performs or not. Not a rigid structure that we cannot fight our way out of.
What policies would be in place to ensure that workers should be protected from financial strain in the case of the country paying more than it can afford?
Thank you for that question. Please repeat the first part.
What policies would be in place to ensure that workers would be protected from financial strain in the case of the country paying more than it can afford?
The Economic Program Oversight Committee is there to monitor economic reforms, and it provides help and greater independence.
As a follow-up, what specific policies
What's
that we could implement to ensure?
Okay, basically what we're saying, we can institute an evaluation committee to ensure that whatever policy are in place, they are supported by the economic trends that are happening and the needs of society.
All right, thank you very much, Maggotty High School. And now for your 3 questions, Team Pika.
Our first question. Why is nominal GDP growth the appropriate benchmark instead of inflation, productivity, or cost of living?
Because nominal GDP growth includes inflation. It therefore means that it provides a cushion. Additionally, for the point raised about what else would be in place, we would have other programs. Other safety network programs are in place. With nominal GDP, what we're saying, we're catering to inflation. When bread goes up, your money goes up.
Your second speaker started by saying inflation reduces purchasing power, and we agree. Now, when wages stagnate, how do workers survive in such an economy when inflation rate surpasses the growth rate?
That is why nominal GDP is the choice. It is the cushion. Nominal GDP is real GDP plus inflation. Something is put in place to cater to this inflation that might pop up.
For the nominal GDP, if the nominal GDP is 10%, but the real GDP is around 3 and the inflation is 7, what are you really basing the
Real GDP, like nominal GDP, is an estimate. So that is what our first speaker pointed out. There is a flaw with both systems. We're giving you the better of the two for the public sector of Jamaica. We're thinking of transforming this public sector. In terms of productivity, when persons have more money, they work harder. And because they're working harder, we're getting more out of them. Hence, GDP will continue to push upwards.
All right, thank you very much for that second period of cross Team Maggotty and Team Pika. At this point in time, the debate is going to pause for 1 minute. That will allow the finishing touches to be placed on the reply speakers, after which we'll invite the opposition reply speaker, followed by the reply speaker from Team Opposition. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. At this point in time, we'd like to invite the final speaker from Team Pika to close out the debate for side opposition. Please make welcome Angelisa Stewart.
Good afternoon, panel. Firstly, let me start by stating, no major developing or third world country has a well-known permanent system that formally pegs annual public sector wage increases directly to nominal GDP growth in the strict way that your motion proposes. Now, the proposition has had their chance. Let me tell you what they are actually proved today. That public sector wage bill is large. That is all. Size is not evidence of waste. And a large number is not a political argument. We have given you 4 reasons that this motion fails. Allow me to drive them home. Jamaican public sector workers have experienced years of wage freezes and severe wage restraint. Currently, the salaries received are not what the report says that they are valued, but it is how the government could afford to pay at the time of implementation. Therefore, they are still below what is actually required. Teachers taught, nurses cared, police served and protected. They carried this country through countless hardships on their back, and also a global pandemic known as COVID-19. Now, after years of sacrifice, the proposition wants to institutionalize another form of wage restraint permanently. That is not fairness. That is exploitation disguised as fiscal responsibility. A teacher's output may not directly raise exports, but that teacher educates the future workforce of this country, whose efforts directly affect the economy. The proposition treats public workers as expenses. We understand that they are investments. Firstly, this policy removes individual merit from the equation entirely. Every public sector worker, star performer, and underperformer alike gets judged by one macro number that they have zero control over. The proposition says negotiation will still happen within the GDP band. Panel, a band averaging 0.8% growth over 10 years is not a band. It is a cage. Secondly, research on Jamaica shows skilled immigration can cost the country up to 20% of GDP through lost productivity, reduced innovation, and loss of educated labor. So, ironically, by suppressing wages in the name of GDP growth, the proposition may actually worsen GDP growth itself. Teacher immigration is running at 45.9%. The proposition's cure costs more than the disease. Countries such as Canada, the UK, the US, and Cayman Islands, to name a few, are paying teachers double what Jamaica does, and they are actively recruiting. This policy tells those workers that Jamaica will not compete. The result? Emptier classrooms, understaffed hospitals, and deteriorating infrastructure. And then GDP worsens anyway. This policy is self-defeating. Thirdly, our second speaker told you that foreign investors respond to preferential treatment such as tax break, expedited licensing, public-private partnerships, not government wage decisions, because Those arrangements held when Jamaica's debt to GDP ratio sat at 140%. Fiscal discipline, already working. Jamaica's debt to GDP is now 60% and declining, achieved through institutional reform, fiscal rules, and the Economic Program Committee, not by pegging GDP. Not a single wage cap. The proposition is scapegoating the sector that makes every other sector possible. The proposition has not proven productivity gains, has not proven net savings, has not proven investor confidence, has not offered a better alternative to the reforms already working. What they have offered is the appearance of fiscal discipline at the expense of the people who holds this country together. No. Panel, we must oppose this motion. The opposition rests.
Thank you very much. And now, finally, to conclude this debate, we invite the third and final speaker from Maggotty High School. Please make welcome Mrs. Johnson Thompson.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We cannot, my opponents, we cannot decide salaries based on flexibility. What flexibility has brought to us? Locking down of the hospitals. Teachers 3 days out of the classroom. That's what flexibility has gotten us. What we are saying to you is use nominal GDP growth. I cannot overemphasize growth. We cannot take that out of the moot. My first speaker has already laid the groundwork, and it is clear that a realistic framework is indeed for Jamaica to peg annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth. Growth, Mr. Speaker, is a cement that is a necessary material as we build this house. If the economy is growing, why then shouldn't public sector workers benefit as well? A growing economy. Should we be asked to tighten our belt once again? Well, to be honest, the pinch has gotten too much. The popular mantra, thanks to Ms. Portia Simpson-Miller, that we must balance the books while balancing people's life. We cannot, my second speaker, only look at need. The truth is that many times, while we boast of the country's growth, many public sector servants are not a part of this economic share. All we propose is a sense of balance. And yes, my opponents, you could argue that some form of risk may happen by using the nominal GDP to peg public sector wage on an annual basis. But what can we do without risk? We are not just simply risking it for the biscuit, but rather for productivity. A calculated risk, I might add. Pay people more, pay them a realistic salary, and watch people work. Don't we all want to see the public sector transformed? If we want a renewed, energized public sector, then we must align their salary increase to the nominal GDP growth. Give public sector's workers a slice of the pie, me ready for mine. After all, you call it the public purse. My second speaker mounted the walls of this house by highlighting the imbalance between the public and the private sector wages. Same university, similar degree, same number of years, several sames, but then when you join the public sector, your salary differs. But if annual salary increase is tied to nominal GDP growth, then we are able to retain talent, my opponents. We need experts in the public sector too. Without aligning wage increase to nominal GDP growth, we run the risk of a brain drain, the same migration that you speak of. Now, that is a risk we cannot take. The reality is that who can afford to run will run. In fact, our talent will leave the land of wood and water to the land of opportunities because individuals can achieve a higher standard of living. Sounds familiar to you, but we must remember that if we pay them based on the growth in the country, people will not have to leave. As a matter of fact, we may just pull persons to Jamaica. Our ministers are constantly assessing the mass migration out of the country. But my opponents, let's look internal. What about the mass migration from public sector to private sector? Public sector workers simply deserve to partake in the pie when there is a growth, when growth exists. People simply have refused the bitter medicine. Adults have simply refused the game of stock and wage freeze and have even opted for colder countries where wages are not frozen. If there is a nominal growth, when we have growth in the GDP, it therefore means that people will be paid more. So we won't have that case of wages being frozen for 4 or 5 years. As a matter of fact, the public sector is tired of the three-card men dangling arguments of salary increases like carrots in the public arenas just to get a few votes. A very common campaign strategy. We all remember 2012. Tying annual wage increase of the public sector to nominal GDP growth removes all this insanity. The stability and predictable that my second speaker spoke of will be maintained. No need to pull a trick out of the hat. Edith Allwood, Anderson, Lambert, Brown, Mark Malabre, maybe I should be in full black today, are all persons who have contributed significantly. We thank them. But the reality is there will be no need for these negotiations if we have a system in place. As a matter of fact, the Minister of Finance could be using the time to run the country because she's not constantly being pulled out of office to deal with negotiations. We're tired of seeing our business sprawled in the media. Mr. Speaker, nominal GDP is the way to go. For years, we have had discussion on productivity in terms of public sector. We all know the old adage, clock in, have breakfast, move around the office, take the phone off the hook, and then voila, it's lunchtime. Let us remove that. We have to transform Jamaica public service, and we have to do it with nominal GDP growth. My opponents do not stand in the way of progress or prosperity. Fly the gate for the public sector workers and fuel Vision 2030. Make Jamaica a place for public sectors too, to live, raise family, and work. We want to steer Jamaica. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, team. Let's hear it for Team Maggotty High School and Team Passport Immigration and Citizenship Agency. And I wonder if Miss Johnson Thompson plan to stay in Kingston.
I will.
She's certainly not going back to Maggotty. But that was a spirited debate, you will all agree, right? At this time, the judges will now deliberate, and the next voice you hear will be that of Chair Adjudicator Ravon Thomas Matthews, who will sum up the match and announce the winners. Once again, well done, teams. And for those of you online, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few. Right.
Excuse me, madam. Would you like some coffee?
Yeah.
How would you like it?
What, yeah? Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. 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 Coffee, coffee. In the morning, may I forget my coffee? Yeah. Coffee.
Excuse me, madam. Would you like some coffee?
Yeah.
How would you like it?
What, yeah? Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed the match between Maggotty High School and the Passport Immigration and Citizenship Agency. The moot before the House read, be it resolved that Jamaica should peg annual public sector wage increases to nominal GDP growth. Now, there's a key term in this moot that really played a large influence in the outcome of this match. That key term, ladies and gentlemen, is nominal GDP growth. See, nominal GDP growth is a measure of all the production and costs and activities that existed and happened within an economy without adjusting for inflation. Now, that's a key distinction that exists in this mood. Without adjusting for inflation means that inflation is not subtracted from this figure. In other words, if an economy produces 100 apples at $100, it has produced a nominal GDP of 10,000. In the next year, if it produces 120 apples at $100 and that $20 increase is as a result of inflation, the nominal GDP is $12,000. Real GDP, on the other hand, takes into consideration inflation, subtracts it from GDP. Therefore, the real GDP of that economy producing apples at $120 would therefore end up still being $10,000 adjusted for inflation, which is what real GDP does. Nominal GDP does not adjust for inflation. It is simply a measure of how much activity took place within an economy within that particular year. Why is this distinction meaningful? Because a large part of what is causing the cost of living crisis in Jamaica is a rise in inflation. Functionally, what nominal GDP growth does is it takes into consideration the rise of inflation, and therefore the cost of living increases as a result of inflation, as well as any other activity that takes place within the society in that year. Why is that relevant to this debate? Team Proposition explains to us that they're going to be presenting a policy which links wages to nominal GDP growth. That functionally links wages to inflation, which is then therefore going to be an adjustment to wages as a result of cost of living, plus any additional economic activity that happened within the society beyond inflation. Team Opposition, however, argued for a large extent what was real GDP. And it is because of that why they were coming to the conclusion in this debate that the growth that is going to be happening when we peg it to salaries is going to be something inconsequential like 0.8%. Not true. Nominal GDP at an inflation rate of 3% and a growth rate of 0.8%, nominal GDP would therefore be 3.8%, not 0.8%. That is a meaningful distinction in the debate. Why? Because it informed how the two teams approached the debate. Maggotty High School approached the debate with this policy as a measure of austerity, not austerity rather, as a measure of actually helping the public sector workers. When we link it, we're helping them with cost of living and we're giving them something on top of it, and that's really good and that's awesome. And so it's actually some sort of measure to actually help them. Team Opposition approached this debate as if the nominal GDP peg is a penalty upon the public sector workers. If inflation rises by 3%, your growth is only going to be 0.8%. You're therefore 2.2% poorer this year than you were last year. That kind of misunderstanding is what brought these two different perspectives to the debate. Because we had these two different perspectives in the debate never really happened the way it should have. For example, when we hear from Team Pika that what this is functionally doing is causing the government to say that we're spending too much money on wages and we need to scale back on wages, and that is going to lead to all sorts of bad outcomes. We get that to a large extent coming out from you, Jardina, Miss McNee, right? To a large extent, this appreciation that what they're saying is that we're going to be spending too much money on public sector wages and we need to cap that, we need to stop that, we need to stifle it, and that's bad and that's a horrible thing to do because our public sector workers are an investment, they are not an expense. If the debate were about real GDP and the capping of wages to it, that would have been reasonable, but it wasn't. And so that argument kind of didn't really have lots of merit as it exists in the debate. Other arguments similarly followed along that vein. What we understood, however, in a really interesting idea, to Peaker's credit, we heard it coming out to a large extent from the first speaker, Mr. Ennis, that what this actually does, it destroys wage negotiation. Now, in this debate, like, pegging it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no avenues for wage negotiation. Otherwise, it means that this is a bare standard. But that is your contention, and Team Maggotty accepts that, right? In fact, of going a little bit further than accepting it, they concede to it that in this world that they're creating, there's not going to be very much avenue for additional negotiation. They said that you won't have to go to this hellfire that we call negotiation with the government anymore since we have this. So you've abandoned negotiation in your world, and you have pointed out the fact that they've abandoned negotiation in their world. Therefore, we get less negotiation. The judges buy it. Why is no negotiation bad? He tells us that this is particularly bad because there are particular interest groups who will not be able to lobby for themselves devoid of this particular cap. Regardless of how much this cap is, these particular interest groups will not be able to lobby for themselves. The nurses, the police stations, these individuals who are working in really deleterious conditions with no great outcomes and benefit and aid to themselves because of this policy, he contends, will not be allowed to negotiate for themselves. Even if we take, and we do take the definition of nominal GDP as inflation plus real growth, it is still like a 0.8% increase objectively because cost of living is tied to inflation. And therefore, what we see is not a negation in how much money you have, but you're just like 0.8% richer year over year. And that's like bad. We take that to a great extent, and we credit that to a great extent coming out from you, Mr. Ennis. And so, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the debate, the judges were forced to weigh the debate as it happened. And so, we would have concluded that with all things being considered, the team that wins this match, gaining 3 points, is the team in proposition, the Maggotty High School. The scores ending this round, Maggotty High School on 270 points to Peaker's 268 points. A round of applause for Peaker. The best debater from this match actually comes to us from the Passport Immigration and Citizenship Agency, that is Mr. Ennis. Ladies and gentlemen, join us tomorrow for day 2 in preliminary round 2 of this competition, where we will have 3 more amazing debates for your viewing pleasure. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.